All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Atoma. This is the 11th session. We've been going 11 weeks strong, and we're just glad to just be able to study the Word with all of you, and thank you so much for all those who've been supporting, subscribing, and studying the Word with us and growing together with us, especially during these very trying times. We have two new guests with us to dive into the Word. Emily and Makenzy, tell us a little bit about who you guys are, where you're at, what you're doing.
Yeah, my name is Emily Ellis, and I am a graduating senior at Moly University, about to head into Dead Week, but after graduation, I'll be pastoring in the Oregon Conference at the Pleasant Valley Church. So, a little bit of who I am.
Hey, y'all. My name is Makenzy, or Mac Z, or Mac Daddy, whatever's easiest for you. I currently am a campus pastor or a campus chaplain at Drake University and Iowa State University, where I get to pour into students' lives and really be an influence on campus. And next semester, I'm hoping I'll be on campus, depending on what COVID says.
Yeah, COVID changed up everything for all of us, and I'm thankful that you guys have joined us. And we're excited to hear you guys' wisdom in this text and just to chop it up with us over the Bible. The text today is coming from John chapter 9. Before we get into it, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for all of us to have the opportunity to take time just to study your word. I pray whoever connects with us may know you more through this study. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so today we'll be reading from John chapter 9, verses 1 to 40. Should I just say John chapter 9? Is that all of it? That's all of it. We're just reading John chapter 9 today, guys. It's a full run. And so, yeah, again, as we always say, don't just listen, participate, take out your Bibles, and study the word with us. And so I'll start reading. It's a long one. As he passed by, he saw a blind man from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Verse 3, Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. Verse 4, we must work the works of him who sent me while it's day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with saliva, and then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and then came back seeing.
His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, isn't this the man who used to sit and beg? Some said he was, and others said, no, he just looks like him. But the beggar kept saying, yes, I am the same one. They asked, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud and spread it over my eyes and told me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. I don't know, he replied. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him.
Then the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man again, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked them, saying, is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself.
Parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So for the second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, "Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, I now see." They asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" And they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from."
The man answered, "Why is this an amazing thing? You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" And they cast him out.
Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, he said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord? Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may be made blind." Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind?" Then some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and also said, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say we see, therefore your sin remains."
This is a lot to unpack, but we'll start off with just our base question, just for you guys to share. What jumped out to you guys as we read these 40 verses? What popped out to each one of you guys?
To be honest, Ben, I thought it was funny in verse 21, at the end of verse 21, as well as, at the end of verse 21, when the parents said, like, he's of age, just ask him, let him speak for himself. I just thought that was funny. Like, I just heard a little sass in the parent's voice. Like, You know, he's old enough to talk for himself.
Yeah.
I think the context of the story is really interesting, how the man was most likely outside of the temple, and we know that there was a feast going on at the time, and so Jesus is walking around and seeing this happen. And this whole scenario is brought before Jesus, not with the intent of bringing healing and restoration to this man, but to challenge him. And so it was almost like people were using kind of this man's situation, not to find pity on him or not to change his life, but to just point out the evil in the world. Like, oh, what about this guy? And it just kind of makes me wonder, how often do we do that with people? We see people suffering. You see a homeless person. You see someone different than you. You see someone with a disability, and you say, oh, man, look at that person. There's sin in the world. There's suffering in the world. But does it actually move me to anything? Does it stir my heart? Does it make me want to come into their situation and speak a word into it or bring life into it? And I think for me, just right off the top, I come from a family that really tries to be quiet on political issues. And I'm just been thinking about the murder of George Floyd today. And like, it's really easy to sit back and be quiet and say, oh man, look at the hurt in the world. But it's another thing to actually go into the situation and try to, speak up for it and bring life to it. So that's kind of stirring in my mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this chapter. as like I imagine it as a Facebook post. The blind guy finally got his Facebook and he's posting like, yo, I can see now. What's up? And the Pharisees are like, how'd that happen? And they're just kind of going through it like, no, we don't believe you. And they're literally trying to gaslight this person into thinking, no, there's something fishy here. You could probably see before. Like, you know, why are you talking? You're kind of young anyway, so why should we believe you?
Mhm.
And like, you're probably, you know, like all this sin. They're trying to just pressure him, but he's staying strong. He's like, I know who healed me. I know what happened. I felt the dirt on my eyes. And like, and he kept on speaking up. And he spoke up so much that they literally threw him out. They banned him on their Facebook group. So like, again, yeah, like, how is that not on everyone's mind right now? George Floyd, the murder, the protests right now that are happening, like, that's an overbearing thing, and especially on social media right now, because we can't see each other face to face for the most part. How are we speaking out? Are we staying silent? Or are we being brave like the man who was blind and immediately started speaking out because he knew who had healed him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
We
interesting.
also see, though, Jesus doesn't merely just speak out in this and doesn't just say who can help this man or, you know, someone can help. But Jesus actually goes into the situation and understands his position of power and is able to like work something within this man's life.
Mm-hmm.
And we see here that Jesus, like, he spits in the mud, creates clay, and puts it on the eyes of the man, which when I was reading it, it just made me think of the messiness that comes in reconciliation and comes in healing. And I guess in relation to George Floyd and you know, just specifically on the topic of just racial justice, I think we want a clean heal, a clean, like, you know, night and day, like things get better like overnight, but it's going to be a messy road. It's going to be a difficult road. It's going to be a road that's going to be hard. Like, it's going to be hard to heal, but it's understanding that we each have a part to play in this. And some of us will get more dirty than others. But the point of it, though, is, and if we look again to verse, if we move to verse 25, we find that the man, like, he focuses on the fact that he's been healed and not really on the semantics of like the semantics of it. And I think in our society, like, we go into like the political arguments of like, well, you know, what was he doing to get himself choked that hard? Or he was, you know, the police, you know, they were trying to do their best, or even like he was accused of forgery. So we look into these minor details that should be eclipsed by the fact that this man died and he shouldn't have died. And so it's like we find here that Jesus is showing that the road to healing is really messy, but those wins that we have, we should focus on those wins and continue on this path of healing. And oftentimes I find that a lot of my friends are the Pharisaical ones that are like trying to justify why this event was not real or why this event should be downplayed. So.
Wow.
And quick before I forget, sorry, Emily, I'm cutting you off. I'm sorry. Or go ahead, actually.
No.
Like, there's like, I'm just thinking the vehicle through which like these things are happening. Like, this guy could now see, and all of us have, like, if you haven't seen the video, you should see the video. It's horrific, but it's something that you need to go through and you need to process. So think about these two things. Like, the blind man can see, there's evidence, the Pharisees are seeing him, and they still like are incredulous. How is that true? And how does that parallel right now with people who are seeing the video and still commenting things like, oh, I would want to see the body cam too. Like, come on, it's right there, right in front of you. Like, it isn't even like, and beyond that, it shouldn't even have gotten to that point. We should be so eager to believe in vulnerable people who are oppressed, you know, and I'm thinking about like the journey that each of us have to go through in this process. And think about it, because Jesus put the clay from the saliva on the guy's eyes, but it wasn't done there, right? He had to make the walk. He had to make that journey to the pool to wash off his eyes. How many of us are still stuck looking around blindly for that pool and to wash off? Or how many of us are willingly sitting down and not doing it and leaving the dirt on our eyes?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting because like we keep talking about the Pharisees and like they're the ones that were against the blind man, but it's also the crowd and even the parents I think are equally guilty, because with the crowd there's almost this moment of, wow, we're shocked, but we're still skeptical. Like, are you really the person? Did you really like now receive sight? And then the same thing with the parents is that the parents might have spoke up, but they didn't speak truthfully or the full truth because they were afraid. And so I think that it was really only Jesus that saw the blind man. And it was the crowds, it was the Pharisees, and even the parents of that person that were afraid to speak up. And obviously the Pharisees, I think, were the harshest, but I think that skepticism and that fear of the crowd and of the parents led them to be silent and led them not to defend the blind man against the Pharisees there. And so I think that that's also interesting because it's easy to put blame on the people in power, but it's also us too that need to be considerate about are we keeping silent? Are we seeing something and, oh, that's beautiful, but I'm still skeptical about it and I need to know the full truth kind of thing.
For me, the thing that stands out to me the most is when Jesus says that he has to do the work of God who sent him while it is daytime, because at night nobody works because nobody can see because it's dark, right? So I'm just thinking of everything that you guys have said and like accountability to ourselves and to each other as the human race, right? As we try to support one another and speak up for one another. And I'm thinking, well, what does it look like to work on behalf of God and on behalf of each other in daytime, as opposed to let it become nighttime and you can't do anything? And I'm just thinking, the thing about night is it's easy to hide in it, right? And even with social media, we try to like bring awareness to it on social media, but what are you doing beyond social media, right? Like, don't just sit behind your screen and like tweet about it or Instagram about it, but what are you doing in your day-to-day life that makes a difference in broad daylight so that people see that you are working for God and that you're working for your neighbor, right? And I'm thinking like it's in everyday situations when you see something happening to the stranger behind you in the line and it shouldn't be happening, do you speak up? When you see the homeless person on the street and maybe the way that they're being treated by someone else who seems to have more, do you speak up? When it's election time and it's time for you to elect people into positions that are going to make a change, that can change policy, that can change law, do you go out to the voting booth and do you vote? Because that's a way that you can speak up in broad daylight for what the situation is in our world, right? So I really liked what Emily said about like looking out for one another, and those are ways that we look out for one another. That it's great to bring awareness on social media because, you know, it educates people, but we also have to get out of behind our screens and do something and make a difference, you know, because that's exactly what Jesus is saying he needs to do in that moment. He can't wait till it's nighttime, till everybody leaves the temple, till everybody's at home and then heal the man, because nobody's going to see the work that he's doing for God, the glory that he's bringing to God, right? He has to do it right here, right now, in that moment. He has to make a difference in this blind man's life.
Wow. I had no idea. So I just have to share, like, when I felt like we should study this text, like, I felt like I wrote the text out to you guys late, but I chose this text like on like Monday. And I had no idea what would happen and how this text would apply to what's happening. And so like even now hearing you guys discuss this, my full lining of questions is got changed. Yeah, and that's fine. I think that's good. My question to you guys is, in the ending of this chapter, Jesus starts talking to the Pharisees and I guess some of his disciples, and they're asking if they were blind. He says, if you were blind, you'd have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. And I think we are not blind to what happens, especially when things hit social media. We are not blind, yet sometimes it seems like people have no guilt, though, even though they're not blind. What is God asking Christians to do then? Like, how do we apply this? What does God call Christians to do when we see something? What do you guys think? Like, what is God really asking us to do the moment we see something? Or is there times where it's okay to remain quiet, or to, try and wonder, just ponder about the situation like the disciples did, ponder about the suffering, ponder about it. When is the appropriate time to do something?
Yeah, I think our best example is the prophets in the Old Testament, because I think, just to say this before I keep talking, a lot of people, when they think of prophecy or prophets, they think of people talking about the future, things that are going to happen, things that that are coming soon or way later, who knows. But the main thing that prophets addressed in the Old Testament was the present, was the things that were happening then and now. Think of David with Bathsheba as an example. Like he was in his sin, and this prophet came, Nathan talked to him and confronted him immediately, and he caused him to see, right? If David had still been blind, he wouldn't have been able to see his own sin. But now that he's saying, he's like, oh my goodness. So if we're at that point, using the prophets and their results as an example, if we are at the point where we're now actually seeing, and all we do is ponder, and all we do is sit down and tweet and comment angry things on Facebook, and we aren't changing our lifestyle or doing something in steps to achieve the goal of not being privy to racism, or just letting it go by without saying anything. If we are to the point where we can see and we're not doing something, we're not really acting as Christians. We're fake.
Ben, I like your question, and I like what you've had to say, Peter. I think the question of what we do is always a little interesting. I remember a couple of years ago when there was another killing happening and more riots were going on. Makenzy, you were at Andrews in seminary, and I was in a local church, and you asked me, Kyle, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in your city? Like, what are you going to do? And it was kind of a interesting question to me, because I was like, oh, I'll talk about it, and I didn't really know what to do. And when I look at this text and consider the context that we're in, if you go to verse 35, you see that kind of after everything has happened, Jesus finds the blind man and he asks him a question. He says, do you believe in the Son of Man? And then in verse 36, he replies, he says, sir, who is he that I may believe? And there's two things that kind of stick out to me. One, there was a willingness in the man to do something. When Jesus asked him to do something, to believe, which really was an action, the word, I'm using logos, so I don't want to sound like a theologian, but the word is pisteo, and it's an active word, meaning it's requiring action, something to happen right then. And this whole act of belief wasn't just a stagnant kind of passing thought, but it was a call to action. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Are you going to do something? And I think for me, when I look at this moment in life, I almost feel like Jesus is asking us the same question. Do you believe? And he's not asking us in a way that's, are you praying? Are you picking up your Bible? But are you willing to actually actively do something as a result of your faith in me? And I think when you look throughout the Bible is full of instances where people of faith, when they actually take their faith seriously, are moved to action. And so I think for me, when I answer this question, it's not a matter of should we do something or should I should I be actively involved? That's already a given. I think it's more of a matter of then believing. And what is believing? Well, when I believe, it actually affects the way I live. It's be living. And so am I going to live in a way that like helps people and changes the lives of people around me, the people that I can come in contact with, the conversations that I'm in. So it's a good question, Ben, and it's a hard question because I think we can only come to like the realization of what we should do when we've done wrestling with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I would also like to add to that, that this story, you know, I think Kyle brings up an interesting point when he talks about how Jesus like addresses the situation. And in this story, we find three ways of how to address the situation. We see the onlookers who see this man regularly, who just kind of are just passive. Just like, you know, I'll put my Facebook thing up, my Facebook post or my Instagram, you know, fake deep quote, or I'll like, you know, I'll just say, oh dang, like that sucks for them. You know, it just sucks for them. And then we have the Pharisees who discount these situations, and we all know that person who is ready to justify why a murder has happened or why police brutality was used or why, you know, rights were being taken away, or and then the list goes on and on and on. And then we have Jesus, who has intentionally went in. He found a solution. He acted upon solution, and he restored this man. And we find Jesus saying, if you were blind, you would have no sin, but now you say, we see, therefore your sin remains. And so there is this transition from someone who may legitimately be ignorant to what's going on. Like they don't know some of the, like I said, we're using the example of racial justice because that's what we're on right now. I legitimately may not know the injustices that are happening in the community next door. I may not know the severity of like police brutality. I may not, and the list goes on, but that could only last for so long. We have social media, we have TVs, we live in 2020, like we have information at our fingertips. Like the same social media platform that you're using to peruse through is the same social media platforms that are headlining stories like these, stories like Breonna Taylor, stories like Philando Castillo, and so on and so forth. And so it's not as if you're like blind to it.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, whenever this thing just keeps coming at you, you can only use the excuse of I'm ignorant to it for so long, because the people walking by, they saw him all the time. And in the text it said, because they ask him, is this the man that was blind? Like, oh, I think that's him, or something that looks like him. So they have experienced him, like they know and they've seen him. And the Pharisees, they just straight up said, like, we don't believe the work God is doing. We don't believe that, you know, this man was once blind and now can see. And so, you know, translating to what we can do today is like, there are books about how to understand racial justice, podcasts, documentaries, people that you can talk to that will help you understand better the situation. Jesus' case was unique because he could legitimately go and just heal the man right then and there, restore him like that.
Yeah.
But in our situation, it's like the process may be long. It will be dirty. It will be hard. It will make us uncomfortable. But we could no longer say, I'm blind, because we're not.
Yeah.
No,
And like a lot of people have seen not just this story, but the countless stories that happened before.
there you go.
And so it's like, how much longer can we say we're blind with no sin? We can't, because we can see it now. We are called as believers to act upon it. And it's then, that's when we have the responsibility. And that's when sin will be accounted to us because we saw and we didn't act.
Yeah.
Makenzy, sorry, Emily.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just gonna say too, like Makenzy, I think another thing that you're just inspiring in me is that when you're talking about the onlookers, it's one thing to just like make it a topic of conversation, because you really can, and that's what they were doing with this man. Like, oh, what about this guy? It's really easy to make it a topic of conversation, but really, Jesus didn't want it to just remain a topic of conversation. He wanted to bring restoration
Right.
and transformation. And so when you look at the story, the way Jesus changed the situation was by spitting in some dirt and making mud. And there was nothing about that mud that was like magical. It was the ability for Jesus to touch the man and ultimately transform his mind, rewire his mind, because we know that when you're blind from birth, oftentimes it's something in your mind. It's something in your brain causing you to not be able to see. And Jesus was able to put the connections back together. And I just feel like for me in my life, like there's many times where I need to move past just talking about something and allow Jesus to bring transformation and restoration and put the connections back together. And I just wonder if this situation that we're all watching on the news and seeing happen, if it's not just a moment to talk about, but it's a moment to really in your own life find deep transformation. People say, like, if you see this and it doesn't bother you, there's something wrong with you. Yeah, like if you're watching stuff like this and it doesn't bother you, we need to find some real transformation in our heart.
Yeah. And kind of like actually what you're saying, Kyle, and what you're saying also, Makenzy, is that I think, yeah, one of the beautiful things about social media is the fact that you see this video and then you see people's reaction for it, and it's in real time and everyone around the world can see it. And it's beautiful because there's so much information, so we can provide awareness. But then I also think the danger in social media is that it's a part of entertainment culture, which means that when you see something like that, you respond passively, because that's what we do in entertainment. You watch a TV show, you binge TV show on Netflix, and you're not led to any action. You're just led to consumption. And so that leads you to be passive. And I think that that has affected the way we worship in churches. I think that we've created entertainment culture, which leads us to be passive instead of being active. But I think that that's also the danger too of seeing so much beautiful information that brings awareness, but then my fear is that it will just remain as that, as just, I hate to say the word entertainment because it's not, but it's just going to lead people to be passive. And I think it's important that, you know, as we're looking at all these different things, to kind of maintain the mindset of, I don't want to let this just sit. I don't want to just simply consume, but I want to do what Kyle was saying, but to actually let this transform. And I think that the process of transformation, I think it's probably one of the hardest, because it forces you to look inward, where it's really easy to point fingers and be like, oh, that person or whatever. But to actually take the hard route and say, but what about me? What areas in my life have I not been allowing God to infiltrate? What areas of life have I not been living a life of love? And to actually hold accountable for yourself. And one of the hardest verses to grapple actually in the Bible is first chapter in John, where it says the light shines in the darkness and the darkness cannot comprehend it. So what happens when the light shines in our darkness? Are we going to be able to comprehend it? And I think it kind of like that verse in chapter 1 is kind of describing what's happening in the situation here. And it's also something that we also have to grapple with.
Moly, any thoughts?
So this is kind of going to go with what Makenzy was saying earlier about Jesus in this situation being very intentional. And just to support what he was saying, in verse 40, it says that the Pharisees were there, right? So when Kyle was mentioning that Jesus is asking the man, do you believe? And he's calling him to action with his belief and like what he's going to do next. Jesus isn't just saying this, like, again, in a corner by himself, just him and the man one-on-one, but he's saying this in public. He's saying this so that the oppressor who's standing right there can hear it. He's saying it so that as he's empowering this man to go and do something with his belief, to make it into something, not to just believe for himself and to keep it to himself, but to do something with it and do something about it. He's doing it right in front of the oppressor. And y'all know I'm like a broken record where I always tell you guys that it's going to be a lot of naysayers in your life. There's going to be people who try to take advantage of moments in your life and try to downplay you, try to talk you down, try to make it seem like the situation is not as bad as it is. And that's what's going on right now. You know, people are coming in and trying to make it seem like, oh, this is not that bad. Oh, like, yeah, he was a crook, or she shouldn't have had her door open, or like whatever excuse they may give, right? Like they were fighting back. They weren't giving way to the police or whatever it may be. But all of that doesn't matter. You need to stand up and empower the people around you and make a difference, make a change, even in front of the oppressor. Don't let them scare you into quietness, because that's what they want. They want you to be quiet because your voice is powerful and they know it. Matter of fact, sorry, I'm really passionate about this, okay? God created the world with word. He spoke it and it came into existence.
Yeah.
And it was good, right? And we are made in the likeness of God. God is word. Therefore, your power lies in your voice. It lies in your word. It lies in the things that you say, because you are God's child. Therefore, as Christians, we need to understand that our voices are powerful and that not be quieted. Don't let the police officers scare you into quietness. Don't let politicians scare you into quietness. Don't let your bosses scare you into quietness. Don't let anything scare you into quietness, because it's by being loud that you get noticed. It's by speaking up that you get noticed. Because if you're quiet, you give up all of your power. You give up all the ability that you have to make a change.
Amen.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Actually, that leads me to my last question, and Moly, you hit it on the spot about what you're saying. But I'm just asking now for if there's any practical advice on the concept, because I look at the parents, people who are impacted. That's their son, who is now getting hunted out by Pharisees, who've just been affected by what's happening, right? And sometimes even when things happen across the world, some of them are closer to home. Some of them might be more distant because of maybe your the way you were brought up or who you are. But there's sometimes a fear of being excommunicated for standing up or for speaking out. They were scared that they would be put out of the synagogue, or even over their own son.
Yeah.
Even over their own kinsman, even over someone, even though they know they're happy. They've seen their son blind from birth, and they've seen his life has changed. Something has happened. Sometimes we see things and we might have an opinion, and we might feel that conviction that God is giving us, that light that God is asking us to share. We might feel the word impressing us to do something, but we get scared. Is there any practical advice, and this is my last question before we wrap up, for us to overcome that fear of excommunication? How do we overcome that?
God would communicate you. I'm sorry.
Go Moly. Go.
Say it again.
God would never excommunicate you, right? Like, why are you worried about an institution? Well, for me personally, when I think of our church, right? Our church that doesn't say anything in times like this. Our church that doesn't say anything about people who look like me, who look like you being murdered, right? And I'm here and I feel hurt because what is it that they're scared of being excommunicated? They're scared of doing the work that God has called them to do, to be excommunicated by the church. Are you serious? Jesus says that you are the temple. Your body is the temple. The Spirit lives within you. Like, religion was not created by God. What God created was disciples and followers, right? So as long as you're following God, as long as you're a disciple of God, what does it matter what people do, what people say? Like,
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I immediately think of Jeremiah chapter 1, where Jeremiah is so afraid of the message that God gave him for the Israelites. And God says, do not say, I'm too young, for you must go wherever send you, and say whatever I tell you. And don't be afraid of the people, for I will be with you and protect you. I, the Lord, have spoken. And then he reached out and touched my mouth and said, look, I've put my words in your mouth. Today I appoint you to stand up against nations and kingdoms. Some you must uproot and tear down, destroy and overthrow. Others you must build up and plant. And I think that that is a powerful message for where we are at today, is that I think that there is a sense of fear to speak up, is because of fear of excommunication, fear of institutions. But I think that this is so powerful because it's a promise from God of saying, no, I will go with you. Do not be afraid, because I will put my words in your mouth. And I think that that is the most powerful way to speak, is to have like God's words speaking through you as you speak truth and restoration. And yeah, it's a scary message because God is saying, yeah, you're going to uproot and you're going to tear down, but then in the process, you're going to build up and plant.
I like that, Emily. I like that a lot. I think to kind of answer your question, Ben, I think that with change, there's always casualties. And I think that what I mean by that is, in your life, when you start to stand up for things that matter, there will be casualties in your life. There will be people that will disown you. There will be people that defriend you, people that reject you, people that don't really vibe with what you're saying. And my vibe, my feeling is kind of like, do I even want those people in my life then? Do I even want those institutions in my life, to be in those circles where I can't be open and honest about things? And I think that it just leads to the fact that it's kind of hard to miss. I mean, it's kind of easy to miss in this story, but every miracle where Jesus healed someone or did something for someone, there was an act of great faith that instigated it. And in this story, there was no act of great faith that instigated it. It wasn't a woman pulling on the hem of Jesus's garment. It wasn't some man coming and begging for his son to be healed. Really, the focus was shifted to this man, but there still was a great act of faith. And the act of faith was when Jesus spoke directly to that blind man and commanded him to walk a pretty good walk from the temple all the way down to the pool of Siloam through the middle of town. And through that walk, people would have thought he was crazy. A blind man with mud on his face, walking, running into things. This dude shouldn't have been walking, like, just in general. He doesn't know where he's going. How does he even know where the pool of Siloam is, other than the fact that he's heard people talk about it? He's never seen the route himself. And so the route of faith is always a route that is really unseen. We don't know the outcome. We don't know the ending. And I share all that because if you want to start standing up for things in your life and speaking on behalf of things and really like being a follower of Jesus, because I think that's what being a follower of Jesus is, it's going to be a really messy, difficult journey that you look like a fool on. But at the end of the day, you're following Jesus. And that's ultimately all that should matter in all of our lives, if we truly believe that Jesus is everything.
Those are all really good takes, by the way. I really enjoyed the commentary, and I think those are really practical, like, steps. I'd also like to add that we need to place ourselves not in the position of Jesus, which is hard to think about, but in the position of the people onlooking, as well as the disciples. Because, well, I'll say this. One practical way we can look at this is listening to the story of those around us and taking those stories seriously. And I say that because in the beginning, they identify this man who was born blind. You just don't see that from like jump. You have to kind of get the story behind it. You kind of have to, you know, not figure out, but listen to the person's story to figure out like how they became blind. Because being blind by birth is not the only way you can be blind. And so as believers today, I do believe that there are stories constantly being said, and we're much more ready to listen to speak and not just listen to listen. Listen to say like, but, or, you know, did you ever think about, no, just listen to the story. And if their story calls upon you to be there for solidarity, be that person to stand with them. If the story calls on you to act, be that person to act. If the story just calls on you just to listen and be in that ear, do that. But I think it begins with listening to a story and or even asking like how would you like for me to help? We're not Jesus. We can't just go around like throwing like, you know, mud into people's eyes and just, you know, make the situation better like that. But what we can do is listen to the story and even ask like, hey, like, you know, right, how can I help you? Or maybe if the person doesn't know how to help themselves, you just take the moment to let them know that you'll be there for them. And then on your own time, figuring out like, how can I help this person?
But that takes faith and that takes relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, and that's why we don't like that answer. We want to have like a clear cut. But your answer is exactly right, because what you're saying is it takes listening and it takes relationship to just shut up sometimes.
Yeah.
And just be down for whatever the journey looks like. You know, I might have to put mud on my face and walk through the middle of downtown, but I'm down for the journey.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the second thing,
you just like inspired.
Oh, and the second last thing I want to point out is there are a few of us who are in the camp of the Pharisees that may be listening, that may be ready to disregard those things that are very evident. Like what other angles do you need? Like it's right there, and not just this one time, but historically, because they're speaking about a worldview that's been historically accepted, that people who are born blind was because of their sin. And so, if you do fall in that camp, I think being in that camp is a really hard one because you have to check your worldview, check why you believe what you believe. And then you'll find that you will start losing a lot of your friends because a lot of your friends that you have are the ones that see the world the same way you see it. And so if you are ready to discredit every single police brutality that comes on TV, check your worldview. If you're ready to discredit systematic racism because you don't see it in your systems, check your worldview. Like if you're ready to like discredit that there are disproportional funds given to certain schools and to other schools, and like you're just ready to defend that with all your heart, all your mind, check your worldview because the facts are out there. And as believers, you know, if you're not a believer, that's your own thing. You know, I can't even speak to that. But as Christ followers, he is constantly wanting to like transform our mind, transform our worldview to where we see the world as he sees it. We see people the way he sees them. We're listening the way he listens. We're acting the way he can act given our circumstance.
I feel really lucky to have taken a class from a guy named Dr. Paul Dibdahl at Walla Walla University. And in the class, Pastoral Care, he says to us and mentions if somebody comes to us with an issue that they have in their life, whether it be like, hey, somebody stole from me, or hey, I've been raped and I don't know what to do. Something like these are two vastly different things, but our first instinct should always be to believe them initially. And then not try to fact check them immediately. Listen to them, like Makenzy was saying. Listen to them, be with them, like be there in solidarity for them. Just empathize with them and echo their truth back at them. You know, it's you're not there to just respond like Alex was saying, but or you know, maybe it's this or maybe it's something else. And it makes me think of of when we're speaking out. There's this quote by Desmond Tutu. He says, "If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor." And that to me is just like, that speaks volumes. How many times have I been silent in things where people have come to me and said things, and I discredit them because of this thing or whatever excuse I would have had. And to any leaders listening right now, if you're staying quiet and you're staying neutral during these times, you're choosing a side, and it's evident, and we can see that. And it just makes me think, imagine if the leader of the Adventist church were to speak up about this issue right now, about what's happening right now. Imagine if you were to make a post in outrage, in just outrage of what's happening right now. That would shake it up. It would shake it up so much. And like I was saying, it would create a division. It would shed off some of those people that you know, claim to be our friends or claim to be in the same, you know, Christian path that we are, but they're really not. I think something like that would be incredible. But again, in their silence, they're choosing their side.
I just want to say thank you, everyone, so much. This is probably our longest Atoma episode, but it's relevant. Oh, Moly, go ahead.
This isn't to really answer the question that Ben had asked, but just another thing that stands out to me in this story is the saddest part about this story is really the fact that the Pharisees don't believe. And that because, yeah, we know the Pharisees are against Jesus the whole time that he's ministering and doing his work. But it's sad because when the disciples ask in the beginning, why is this man blind? Like, who sinned that he should be blind? Was it him or was it his parents? It puts a light on the mentality that people had back then, in the sense that they thought that if somebody was crippled, if somebody was sick, if somebody was dying, if anything happened, it's because somebody had sinned, right? Which means that these parents, when their son was born and he was born blind, they probably went to the temple. They probably offered up sacrifices every year to ask for forgiveness for their sins or for whatever it was that had made their son blind. So these Pharisees saw the pain and the hurt that this family went through because their son was blind, right? So in that moment, those people who are their spiritual leaders, who are supposed to be their guide towards God, in the moment where they should have been rejoicing with this family, that this heavy load has been taken from them, that this great miracle has happened to them, instead of rejoicing with them, they chastise them, they push them aside, they scare them. And I think it relates to a lot of what's going on today, in the sense that, like, police officers are supposed to protect you, right? They're supposed to make you feel safe. Like, when you're little in kindergarten, they teach you, like, if you ever need help with anything, you call 911 and they will help you. They'll come to the rescue. Or even with church leaders staying quiet, you know, these are our spiritual leaders, people that we look to for guidance. And like Peter said, their silence says a lot about what side they're on. And that's the part about this situation that hurts the most. People that you're supposed to be able to depend on, people that are supposed to guide you, taking a stand against you, it leaves you like, wow, like, what do I even do? So the fact that this blind man is able to, even in the instance where his spiritual leaders are against him, is still able to stand in his faith and stand in what he believes in, is extremely powerful. So even, like I mentioned before, like, even though the people who are around you are supposed to support you and are supposed to be there for you, like, it's okay to stand in your belief. Just because they're against you doesn't mean that you have to shift, because you know what is right and you know what you believe in and you know who you are following and the kind of God that you serve.
Can I add one thing, Ben, as I know we're probably trying to end?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Moly just like pointed this thing out in my mind, and it's that the blind man and his family were being punished for something, he didn't do anything, but they were being punished because of what his disability in their minds represented, what it associated him with. And I think so many times, I'm just keeping it 1,000% real, we keep seeing Black men being murdered because we have associated their skin color with something or evil or wrong. The blind man was being punished and ridiculed by the Pharisees because he was blind. How many times are we going to ridicule and literally kill people because we have associated their skin color to mean something and let that define who they are? And it's just, I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm a white dude with a big belly, and I'm a pastor, so I'm all of the things of the people who do a lot of this harm, and I'm just a white guy trying to figure out how I can be a voice for difference, for positive. And it's just crazy to me, just that hit me as Moly was speaking. I don't know.
No, wow, there's just this, I had no idea how much this text would speak into what's going on now. And I'm just so blessed that we've been able to discuss it and share with each other, and give practical steps for us to bring healing or to move in the direction that we need to. Just in closing, everyone who's listening, and to each other and to myself, being a Christian does not consist of being an onlooker. Being a Christian isn't a calling to do nothing when there's crisis, to do nothing when there's injustice, to do nothing when there's pain. In fact, when we see pain, when we see affliction, when we see sorrow, loss, injustice, like Jesus did, that's a call to action, that's an opportunity. And it's, I think, the calling of everyone to step up when we see these things. And that's what God has always called us to do. That's what he called people from the beginning, since Adam. That's what he called people in the New Testament. And that's what he's calling people today, 2020, when things happen across the world that aren't new. These aren't new things. These aren't a brand new thing. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, as we know. But it's not too late for us to do the right thing in response, to do the right thing to try to stop it, to do the right thing to bring awareness. So everyone who's listening, thank you for your time today. And I pray that we're able to learn to listen, learn to act, and learn to move forward despite any sort of opinion or of what you might look like doing that, because God will never leave you and God calls you to action. Stay blessed, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of Atoma.